Hey, and welcome back to the number one podcast in the world, the Cellarcast, episode 126. I'm recording this a little bit late because I stayed up late playing, well, not playing, but after my Dark Souls 3 stream yesterday, which was a great time, and I'll talk about the game in a minute. Should I lead with it? I should probably lead with it. But I usually try. I want to I like to warm up a little bit with something else. Unfortunately, we don't have any questions from last time. No questions to review. But something interesting did happen that I don't know. I haven't heard that many people talking about. But it kind of caught my interest. So there's like an Alex Jones game that came out. It just kind of got announced and then dropped in like the same day. It's called New World Order Wars. And I saw the trailer for it. And I was caught in a really interesting web. Because there's two sides to this. Number one, I would describe this as like, there's a conflict between Alex Jones the meme and Alex Jones the man. So Alex Jones the meme is the funny, wacky guy who he says crazy things and makes a bunch of funny sound bites for memes, right? And everyone likes to laugh, like, haha, he's so funny. And then there's like Alex Jones, the man, like the person who, looked he looked the parents of a school shooting in the eyes and told them that their children didn't exist and they were lying about it. And he did it so often and encouraged so many other people to do that he got sued for it and had to pay out like $1 billion, which I don't think he's paying off anytime soon. I forget the actual number, but there's two sides of the coin, right? There's the guy who's funny, and there's the guy who preaches, like, the great replacement theory. I don't know what the fuck he's into, because I don't watch enough Alex Jones to know. But every time I see, like, him actually talk about something he believes, it's like, oh. And it's so weird, because he's usually, like, so close. I feel like he's so close to actually... You get this with, like, a lot of conspiracy theories. They're like, yo, the government systems are corrupt, and... they're created to to benefit like a specific class of people at the detriment of the majority of society, and you're like, yeah, that's pretty. I think that's pretty accurate. And then they're like, yeah, and it's the Jews, and you're like, I mean, we don't have to go in that direction. We don't have to go there. It's like you're with them for like a while, and then there's like a fork in the road, and they like rocket off in one direction, and you're like, ooh, maybe not down there. Maybe let's not go to Detroit with that, That's what that fork in the road goes to. And it puts me at this crisis of conscience, sort of, because on one hand, I'm looking at this game, and there's a boss battle with Bill. It's like a Metal Slug type run and gun shooter with really nice pixel art. And there's like a boss, and it's Bill Clinton, and he's playing the saxophone, but he's like on top of the Jeffrey Epstein Island temple. And like, that's the funniest shit I've ever seen. And then also, there's like... And then also, it's like, but it's Alex Jones, and the money is going directly to him, like someone who funds. I don't know if he funds, but it is funding at least like his show or the fucking Sandy Hook bailout for him. And it's like weird. I mean, yeah, it's so strange. It's the type of game that would be perfect to pirate, And then I looked at the website, and I couldn't find anything on the developer. It's someone called... Let me pull up the website again. Where is it? It's actually really hard to find the website. The official alexjonesgame.com, and when you first click on the link, it fucking gives you like a sign up thing, but you don't have to sign up for any email listing. That's a little fishy. There's like, they can't even play the like, there's like no YouTube embed of this. It's just it's on Rumble. It's where the trailer is. Who made this? SVGS, who I've never heard of. And I'm trying to find like SVGS games. Like, yeah, I can't find anything from them. I don't think that they've ever done anything else. They don't have a page on Moby Games. They don't have anything. And their own self-description at the bottom of this webpage is that they're the leading free speech-inspired game development studio. Ready to create monumental games for influential figures who tackle serious worldly issues. We battle against the fear of cancel culture, putting privacy first and refusing to deplatform legal content. It's just a bunch of fucking gobbledygook virtue signaling mush to like people who are like, dude, when people get mad at me because I said the N-word, that's censorship. Oh, you know what this... Okay. Totally off topic. I was rewatching recently, just because it ended up in my algorithm again. I was rewatching a bunch of old episodes of Idubbbz Kickstarter crap, which I used to love those videos back in high school, like middle school and high school. I used to love them. I was a big Idubbbz fan back then, and I was rewatching them now, and I remember, I haven't kept up with this content in years. Like, I know people got mad at him because, like, his wife does OnlyFans or whatever, and I don't really care. I know he did the boxing thing, the Creator Clash. I never really paid attention to that because I don't care about boxing. I also didn't know anyone who was involved in that. I knew maybe 2 or 3 people who were involved in that. So I'd never really paid attention to that. But I did watch a video that he made talking about how he regrets a lot of his old content. And I was like, I can see, having not watched it in years, I was like, I can see that. I can see where he's coming from, at least. If I can imagine maybe not resonating as much with that or changing a lot. It was a very different time and different culture. And it made sense to me. But at the same time I was like, yeah, but I still really love, I have a lot of affection and fondness for those videos. I remember really liking them when I was a teenager. And I hadn't actually gone back and watched them in a while. And it's really funny because it made, when I started watching them, it was a very different experience to watch those as a 21-year-old compared to a, 15-year-old. Which just might not seem like a lot of time, but that is a lot of time to grow up and stuff. And one of the things that really struck me about it was that, how mean he is. It's really, really off-putting. Actually, when I went back to watch, I was like, man, I didn't remember him being this mean-spirited to so many people. And there's a line where it's like, okay, some people that were featured on that show, which I don't know if anyone knows about. I'm assuming everyone knows about this, but I'm just going to talk about it like that you do. It was a show about bad Kickstarter projects, which was a big thing back in the back in the 2010s. I feel like Kickstarter is evened out a little more now. It's less popular. It's less well known. People don't just throw up. I feel maybe they do. You just don't hear about as much crap being thrown up on that website anymore. Well, he'd make these videos, and there's some people who were featured on that show who were legitimate scam artists, and they had put together a production that was geared towards misinforming or misleading customers with either pseudoscience or fake stories. There's some good episodes of the series. He's talking about that one guy who's trying to fundraise for his lemon farm, and he put together this fake video that got on like the news or something, like not a Dateline, but something like that. Was it Dateline? Inside Edition. It got on Inside Edition, not Dateline. It got on like Inside Edition of him staging this thing where there was someone trying to spy on him with a drone, and he shot it down, and it was completely fake. And it's like, wow, what a crazy, weird story. And there's some people who, you know, are just, they're completely out of their depth, and they don't have the ability to deliver on a project, or just the product is fucking stupid, right? And like those things are like, I can understand being more harsh on those people, but then you get, you know, these videos of just some guy who just, it's some fucking guy in his room who has no idea what he's doing, and he wants to make an MMO or some game, like he wants to make a video game that's way beyond his scope or skill set. He has no ability to manage people. He has no knowledge of programming or making assets or literally anything involved in making a video game. But he wants you to give him $100,000, and he has like because he's got a lot of ideas. And that's the type of person who's like, that's a very different kind of person. Like, they're just sort of clueless. They do deserve to be, to get some kind of pushback, I think, to like actually give them like some reality. But the way you do it doesn't have to be like, excuse me, I ate some chili before this. The way you do it doesn't have to be like, Idubbbz will just immediately go at like insulting this guy personally or making fun of his voice. And it's just like, I don't know, there's something about it that just feels mean-spirited. When it's like, it didn't necessarily have to be conveyed that way, and it still could have been funny, you know? I think it still could have been funny without just being so... Like, how many people do you think are just like that guy, and they just suddenly get this way... Because those videos would get, like, 3 million or 4 million views, which is crazy to me, because, you know, in the last... From a current day YouTube perspective, something like a guy sitting in his room talking about Kickstarter projects doesn't feel like it would get that many views. Like, not that many, but it was just what it was like back then. And it's like, how many people do you think are like this guy who got this wave? Like, what were the consequences of that? Did they get, like, harassment because of this? And it's like, does that guy deserve to have people fucking like calling up his family and shit? It's like, no. Like, that's ridiculous. And when I look at those videos, I think like, you know, when I don't know if in that like video about him regretting his past content, if he was like, I don't know if he said it, but I would totally believe him if he said that during that time in his life that he was like a miserable person. I would buy it, because that kind of like harshness and just sort of cruelty towards people, even if you could say it's like a character, it feels sort of like it's not really a character. Like it feels like a reflection of some kind of like deep unhappiness inside, right? Like it's being taken out in a creative form, and that's, I don't know, like, because some videos are actually really funny and there's funny moments, and I can totally see, oh yeah, I totally remember why I love this guy so much when I was a teenager, but yeah, just this sort of uncomfortable new perspective on it. I think maybe just because I'm a lot happier now. So when I see something that feels so counter to that, like I couldn't imagine a happy person, a truly happy person making videos like that in that specific way, like with that delivery. And I think it's interesting. And you'll go back and you'll see comments from people from relatively recently, and you know, it never hit me how weird it was. I remember in that video about his regrets, he said that he would meet fans of his and he didn't like them. Like, he didn't like them as people. They were just severely unpleasant to be around. And I was like, yeah, I can get that, because reading these comments and the people who are so upset with him now. It's like, why are you upset with him? Well, the primary thing for a lot of them is that, like, it's really interesting when you kind of put it all together. It's either like it's because his girlfriend does OnlyFans, or it's because he said that he doesn't like his old content and he shifted to making different stuff. And there's this sort of weird thing that I sort of, maybe I'm armchair psychologizing, but it really feels like Idubbbz, edgy Idubbbz, was like this hero to these people. This hero to these people, and so much so that, like, when he does something that they wouldn't do, like, look, like, if you're, I don't know, man, like, that's a personal decision and, like, an agreement between them, and they're fucking adults, like him and his wife. Are they white? I don't know if they're married. That's like an agreement between them, and it's like, you know, whatever. Like, that's not really my business. But there's someone who looks at that and they're like, I would never do that. Why would Ian do that? Oh, you've betrayed me. Or like the whole selling out, like, you only stopped doing it because YouTube started demonetizing videos that were edgy and cool like you. You sold out, man. I used to love it when you said the N-word. That was so awesome. Yes, I'm white. And just like, it's like, man, how old do you think that person is? They have to be an adult, like well into adulthood now, right? To be able to say that now. And it's like, God, ooh, you sound annoying as shit. It's like, it really feels like there was this, they get this sense of a personal betrayal out of the fact that this white guy won't say the N-word anymore. And it's very telling, because it's like they can't believe that he would just come to the conclusion that maybe that wasn't like a good thing, or maybe he changed as a person and he doesn't approve of that anymore. No, it's like a conspiracy theory. It has to be because it's not, he won't get monetized anymore. That's what it is. These two things can't just coincide, right? It couldn't even be that the punishment and the criticism that he got for that kind of content made him reflect at all on what he was like as a person. No, he was 27 when he made those, so essentially every single part of his personality was locked in forever, and people will never change. And there's also this interesting kind of like thing. It reminds me of how there's this assumption that when someone is rude or when someone's an asshole, that they're like, oh, they're being real. Like, you got this a lot with Trump. They're being real. They're talking. They're really saying what's on there. They tell it like it is. And it's funny because built into that is this assumption that, like, being negative or being edgy or rude or mean is who that person really is inside. And there's that kind of, there's a kernel of truth. There's like the logic is that, oh, well, you know, being those things is frowned upon to, let's say, most people, right? Those are generally considered maybe not great qualities, like being mean and just being an asshole, right? So if you're gonna do that, you're doing it at the expense of your view in, like, your social standing, which means you have to be really dedicated to it because it's some kind of like social sacrifice, which ignores the fact that there is still an audience of people who are like legitimately like that, you know, and who also are fine with that. Like, have you ever thought that maybe the people who go up and they say crazy inflammatory shit are doing it because they know there's people who love that stuff? Do you remember Donald Trump? Have you ever thought that, like, it kind of reveals this assumption made by a lot of those people that is, I don't know, not everyone, I'm sure, but I feel like there's this implication that everyone on the inside really wants to say the N-word. They really want to drop a hard R, and they can't because of, like, society or some, like, vague construction that they've come up with. That society doesn't want you to say it. Or, you know, whatever mean, awful shit you want to say. They don't like that. And it's it's like, you know, it's like Freud going, everyone wants to have sex with their mothers. Everyone actually wants to have sex with their mothers. And it's like, Dr. Freud, do you think that you want to have sex with your mom? And he's like, no, that's ridiculous. Everyone wants to do that. There's definitely a behavior I've noticed in some people where they have this belief and it's like, yeah, everyone wants to do that. I feel like everyone's got stuff like that to some extent. They're like, yeah, everyone thinks like this, or everyone's like this, or everyone does this, you know, every relationship is like this. And then you're like what? And then they just describe some like really unhealthy behavior. You're like, not every relationship is like that. That's a problem. I recently, and even with like other little things, it's so funny when you look at like all these assumptions that you make about stuff. I recently had a friend who came out to me as transgender, and they were saying, which was a real shock to me. And when I was asking them about it, they said that they came to like they came to the realization, well, for like a couple different reasons. But one thing that they told me was that they learned that it's not normal to just assume that everybody wants to be a woman. I was like, what? And they were like, yeah. So when I was growing up, I was like, oh yeah, everyone wants to be a woman. And if you're like a man, you just got unlucky. And I just assumed everyone felt like that. I was like, no, not everyone feels like that. They're like, yeah, I know that now. All these like funny little assumptions. I'm absolutely guilty of it too. That's one of the reasons why I could kind of like didn't get help for my anxiety for a really long time. I was like, oh yeah, because I had super severe death anxiety, and I was really scared of dying for a long time, and like part of my whole life until a year or two ago. And one of the ways I rationalized it was like, oh yeah, everyone's super afraid of dying because it's like it's the biggest problem ever, and everyone has to deal with it. And the only reason that everyone isn't as like paralyzingly afraid of it to the point that they're having panic attacks like me is because I'm the only one who actually thinks about it. Which is like obviously crazy, right? Like it's an irrational way to rationalize something. But I legitimately, like, that's what I thought. That was just my assumption was, oh yeah, everyone's like that. They just don't talk about it because they don't think about it. And I'm the only person who acknowledges it. So like you find all these weird little assumptions to rationalize away the things about yourself that like you maybe don't recognize are different, or, you know, not always a problem necessarily. There's plenty of harmless things that people just assume. But yeah, I don't know. That was a little kind of like thought tangent that I went off on. Hey, so you want to talk about Dark Souls 3? Cool, me too. So, it was the 3-year anniversary of The Cellar on Friday, technically, and I did not stream on Friday because the Scott Pilgrim anime came out, and Friday is Cats and Mine? I never know how to say that. Cat and Eyes, I suppose? It's our date day. So I went over to her, asked me to watch it, and I'll be talking about that later. So I did the stream the next day. I did it with my friend of the show, Prox, who guided me a little bit through the game. Probably better at not backseating than I was when he was streaming Deus Ex. But I should be better about that. I played Dark Souls 3 for the first time. I've never played a Souls game. I've never played a FromSoft game before, but I was always interested in it. I I got Dark Souls 3 a little while ago and figured that, hey, the anniversary, that would maybe be a good time, because I'm going to stream anyway. I think it would be fun to stream my first time playing Dark Souls. So going into Dark Souls 3, after that first stream, which was about 6 hours, I got through that initial... I finished, what is it? Lothric? I think Laundry. And I finished that, which is like the first real area of the game. The first real, I guess, level. And so I went... This is just a first impressions, So my feelings on it evolved over the course of that stream. I hit my head against a wall, and then I kind of came out on the other end with some different ideas about it. So at first I found okay, you have to keep in mind, I'm playing with the keyboard controls because I hate God. So I am playing on the keyboard controls. It should be noted, Dark Souls 3 is not a good PC port. It just kind of assumes that you're using a controller, which, like, okay, that's fine. I'm going against the grain on this. But also, like, you ported it to PC and you didn't bother to come up with different icons for, like tutorial stuff or keybinds and stuff. So it's telling me, hey, do this with a left trigger. And I'm like, what is that? Yeah, extremely bare bones settings. Honestly, just a bunch of stutters, which might just be an issue on my end. Not a great PC port. Feels very awkward, but and that's on top of Dark Souls combat feeling, I think, kind of awkward the first time you get into it. But I think I pushed through it, and I got a much better sense of the flow of combat in terms of decision making. I started using a shield, which helped a lot. I got a better grasp of what I was actually able to do and how enemies worked and the stamina system and all that. And now, having finished the first level, I feel much more confident in the combat, and then also just, I don't know, in tackling the game. It felt a lot better. I do have some gripes with the game, first off, and I genuinely don't think that these are going to change over the course of the game. They feel like things that are just built into the experience that I don't like. And most of them are technical issues and the way that the game handles certain things. So, number one, I really dislike the way that weapons the way that they have collision with the environment. I think it's really obnoxious, and it just kind of ends up getting in the way. A lot of the time, it does things to... I guess it's like... The only real gameplay implications where I feel like it could be argued at all is these cases where you're fighting an enemy and you shouldn't fight them in, say, a doorway. And you have to, like, move out. And it's like, okay, I don't know how much that's really worth it to me to have that kind of, like, a decision introduced into the game for all of the headache that it creates. Because if an enemy is in a corner, you'll just fucking clank, 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 and you have to approach them from these really strange wide angles a lot of the time. And I don't like it. I find it really awkward and clunky in a way that I don't appreciate. Other thing, the camera is really goddamn finicky. It does not like being near walls. And this compounds with my third issue, which is that the lock-on is also very finicky. You can lock on to something, but only when they're within a certain range. And if they're not, then you can risk just, like, spinning. If you hit the lock-on button when you are not in range of an enemy, the camera will flip around to essentially face the same direction as your character, which means that I can be... So an enemy pops up, I start, I'm running, an enemy comes up, I start running around just to, like, pace back to build some distance, and I hit the lock-on button, but I'm too far away from them for whatever reason, or just, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like working I feel it should, and then my camera swings around, and now I can't see them, and I have to turn all the way around. This is sort of compounded by the fact that while attacking, the camera will sometimes just go to like a weird overhead view, or just, I don't know, I've had situations where it just spun around like 360 degrees, and, did I say 360 degrees earlier? I meant that it was like, it spins around 180 degrees. It just flips around. But it's cases where I'll be attacking and doing like a combo, and it'll flip around 360 degrees, and you have zero control over the camera until you finished attacking, until you finish the whole thing, which for combat, especially when you're fighting multiple enemies and juggling multiple enemies, I found weird and annoying, because I couldn't get to the right angle where the game would let me lock onto them, onto like the next one that I wanted to attack after killing the first one. And just a lot of awkwardnesses, and it kind of builds up, and it gets really bad in the first level. There were some cases where you were in these kind of cramped environments. That first level has a couple different towers with these descending staircases that are on the inside walls, and that is super awkward. I really disliked those specific rooms, because you're walking down and there's an enemy down there. You know that it's down there, but you can't actually rotate the camera to see the enemy to lock onto them, because the camera is like having a field day smashing into a wall. And that makes things like, hey, if they have a crossbow or some kind of ranged attack, like a throwing knife, the angle that you have to be facing is it's more precise than you would expect if you're going to block it with your shield. So if you aren't properly locked onto them, locking onto them is like it's the most consistent way that you can guarantee actually blocking something. And if you don't lock onto them, things just get really awkward. And none of these are like game killers, and I feel like these problems are exacerbated by level design that, let's just say, isn't aware of those things or doesn't take those things into account. So I could see it being either a big problem or a minor annoyance going forward in the game, but I don't like them. Those are my real issues with the game. And they start popping up really when, fighting multiple enemies can be a little bit of a pain, depending on what the enemies are. I found that the most fun I was having was when I was able to fight one enemy, and like a one-on-one, like those knights in Laundry, and they... I would get annoyed and all that, but figuring out the fight and the patterns and kind of how to fight them was like genuinely fun. And when I would get like a super clean fight against, say, like the spear and shield knight guys, that was really satisfying, where I wouldn't get hit a single time. I like the whole system of stamina management. I'm at the beginning of the game, so I'm a little weak, and I feel like I need a lot more stamina. How when you raise your shield, so I'm using like I want to say kite shield, which absorbs 100% of physical damage. So I take 0 damage from just physical strikes, which is basically every enemy right now. But depending on the strength of the attack that you block, it will just chunk out your stamina, which can put you in awkward situations that force you to fight enemies differently. So the sword and shield guys, I noticed, like the sword and shield knights in Laundry, I forget, I'm just going to call it Laundry, they had this like series of attacks. So like the spear dudes, I could handle them because I could just like walk up and then kind of trigger them for an attack, and then either roll out of the way or just kind of sidestep it. And then I could go in and deal like a good like 70% of their health in one combo and then get back out of the way. The knight guys will only attack when they're much closer, and they have 1 or 2 moves that's like a series of swings, and it just crushed my stamina whenever I blocked it, to the point where I got basically guard broken because I ran out of stamina, and then I'm stuck in like a daze, and then I get chewed up. by their next follow-up. So it's literally a guard crush combo that they do to you. And so it's okay, I have to figure out how to fight that differently. Like, I have to figure out rolling at the right time and all that. I finished that level. I beat the boss, Vort of the Boreal Valley, who I didn't realize was the first boss of the game. Because when I heard his theme, I was like, oh, it's the meme song. I've used that song before. Ho, 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 ho. Ho, 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 ho. And you know what? There was a while where I was very... I got to him, I found the boss fight. And I was very apprehensive about actually starting the boss, because I just didn't I think I tried him one time and I was like, yeah, I don't feel like I'm good enough to fight him. And I kind of ground souls for a bit. I died a lot and lost a lot of goddamn souls, which feels really bad. And then I tried him again and I was like, you know what? This isn't too bad. I think I tried him, like, I went back to it. I died really fast. I tried again. And I got like, I dealt like 30 or 40% of his health. And I was like, hey, this is actually, okay, I'm starting to see it. I just have to, in the first phase, you just kind of want to like delay your rolls like a second longer than you want to. And that usually dodges most of his stuff. And then the second phase, what I figured out eventually was then you just kind of like, you have to roll a little in advance because he speeds up a lot. And also, it wasn't obvious to me at first, but I eventually figured out by playing that, oh, you can like get under him, you can get behind him, you can get to the side and just completely dodge his attacks. And you deal a decent amount of damage to his health bar. And I was like, oh, okay. It got much easier. Once I tried it a couple times, it was I realized it actually wasn't that bad. It wasn't nearly that bad if you understand a little. Like, I could tell immediately that like walking with the shield probably wasn't going to get me that far just because of like the stamina chunking. But yeah, it felt pretty good to beat him. I guess he's technically the second boss of the game because the first one is at the end of the sort of tutorial starting area. But it felt good. It was like, oh shit, okay, I figured it out. I kind of got his pattern down. I got hit a couple times. I had to use some Estus, but it was very doable. I've started to learn. I've heard because these games have been so mythologized as these like super masochist difficulty games, and I don't really think that that's true. I wouldn't say that that's true. They're definitely hard. It's like it's a hard game. It does a lot of unfair, like mean things to you with certain enemy combinations, putting just like, hey, here's a fucking archer that you couldn't have seen from up there who's going to be sniping at you while you're down on this bridge. That's annoying. It does a lot of things that are mean to you. It's a game about like making mistakes. It's a game about making mistakes and learning from them. It definitely asks a lot of focus from the player. Like, I felt like I had to focus a lot, especially during certain battles. It was not an easy game to talk over, but once you actually, I don't know, it feels a lot more doable now, which I like. I might go back and do another stream of it. I don't know. I usually try to focus on like making an actual video. But yeah, that was my initial thoughts on Dark Souls 3. Fun, doable, but yeah, some jank that I'm not a fan of, and mostly on the technical side. I want to talk about what's the next thing I want to talk about? Okay, you know what? Let's talk about Scott Pilgrim. Let's talk about Scott Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off specifically. So, I want to preface this by saying that I have to spoiler warning this pretty hard. In a second. We won't get off to it. I will say, so this thing was marketed as it was marketed as a comic accurate adaptation of the source material. I will say that if you have not watched if you haven't watched or read Scott Pilgrim before, you should not watch the anime. You should not watch it. It won't make sense to you. You'll be confused. It will be extremely unsatisfying and weird. I would say if you should at least have seen the movie before you watch the anime. I think optimally you would have seen the movie and read the comic beforehand to get the most out of it. And that is the end of my non-spoiler thing, because you can't talk about this without spoiling it. So yeah, that's it. Go read the comic. Go watch the movie. They're great. I like the comic more, but they're great. And then you can go watch the show, and you will probably have a great time with it, because we had a great time with it. So spoiler section starts now. So this is not an adaptation of Scott Pilgrim, the comic book, nor the movie. This is essentially the closest thing you could get to making a sequel without actually making a sequel. I've heard people compare it to things like Rebuild of Evangelion, which I haven't watched. I would also describe it as it's the disappearance of Haruhi Suzumiya. So, the first episode of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off we were watching it, and it follows the comic. It's following the comic, right? You're getting the scenes, but there's some stuff that's switched around. Like, it opens with them, I think, it's like the band practice, and Knives is already there. You don't get the scene which is at the start of the movie and the comic, which is Scott going to meet Knives at her school, and you get introduced to that. You start out with the band thing, and then you don't get the scene of Scott seeing Ramona at the library. He just sees her at the party. The exchange they have is based off of... we have a new exchange. I forget what the original one in the comic was. In the movie, it was... He tells her about Pac-Man. And in the anime, he tells her about how there were 2 Sonic the Hedgehog cartoons where Sonic was voiced by Jaleel White. And then it kind of proceeds as normal, but we're like, oh, it's not a battle. It's like you get to the scene of the first fight with Matthew Patel, but it's not a battle of the bands. It's just a concert, and their opener flaked on them. And then I'm like, okay, that's different. And there's just things that aren't happening. And I'm like, so did they get shifted around? Because according to Kat, this was from what Brian Lee O'Malley said, there was going to be changes. I'm like, okay, but how many changes could there be? Because I was like, I mean, it's probably going to be the whole comic, because Gideon is in the trailer and he only appears in volume 6, right? The last volume. And then the fight with Matthew happens and Scott Pilgrim dies. And we're like, what? That's weird. And it isn't like immediately rectified. It the episode keeps going, and everyone leaves, and Matthew's like, what? Okay, I guess I won. And then he leaves, and we're like, what? That's interesting. And then the second episode starts up, and it's a funeral for Scott Pilgrim, where, we're like, what? What is going on? Wait, what is this? And they go up to the casket, and I'm like, what if they just... Because he, disappears into coins, And we're like, what if they just put the coins in there? And the next shot is the coins in the casket. It's like an open casket funeral. I was like... And then, Envy shows up, and we're like, wait, what is happening? And she does, a performance at his fucking funeral. And we're like, what the fuck is going on? And then transition to the League of Evil X's at Gideon's headquarters, And they have this whole fight scene where Matthew Patel is like fighting Gideon for control of his corporation, and he wins, and Gideon like goes back to Toronto, and you're like, whoa. We spent the first episode, we left on like a confusion. Second episode was like deeply confused. Like we did not know what was going on. We were like, it looks cool, but like the fight scenes and everything it's cool, but, and there's some funny jokes. We just don't know what's happening. And then by the third episode, I feel like it really kicks off. There's 8 episodes, right? So Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is called such because Scott Pilgrim takes the fuck off. He is in less than half of the show. It's not a show about Scott Pilgrim. It is essentially the original story, like a weird fusion of the comic and the movie, but it's a what-if scenario if Scott Pilgrim disappeared after the fight with Matthew Patel. And everyone thinks that he's dead, but Ramona thinks that he's alive and he's been kidnapped. And she goes Columbo. She goes full Columbo, which they directly reference, trying to find leads on him. And by doing this, she meets all the other characters, reconnects with her exes, and essentially goes through her character arc, but herself. And Scott ends up, back at the end, and he has a little arc as well. But it's essentially like, what if Ramona was the main character of Scott Pilgrim versus the world? It's Ramona Flowers versus the world. And we loved it. We loved it. There's a lot of people who are very disappointed, and I understand it, This was marketed as a 1-to-1 adaptation of the comic, with maybe a few tweaks here and there, but basically the storyline of the comic. And it ends up being something completely different. And if that disappointment is too much for you, I can understand that, but I think for what it is, we absolutely loved it. It's essentially because, okay, when I was sad after I finished the comic because I loved it so much and it was over, and I loved the characters and I wanted to see more of them, but the way that it ends is it's too perfect. I wouldn't want there to be a follow-up to that story. Like, those last couple pages have this real, like sense of magic to them. And there's this real, like tender sensation that I get when I think about the ending of that comic. And I just leaving it as it is, kind of open-ended, kind of ambiguous, but leaving it like that is, I feel like I wouldn't want that to be changed. If you were to make a follow-up to it, even one that was like, way in the future, when they're like adults and stuff. Well, more adults. They're more of adults. It feels like just knowing would kind of violate the sort of the specialness of that ending. The magic. And so that's why that's why I'm torn, right? This is basically, when I say it's the closest you could get to a sequel, it's because it's about everyone but Scott Pilgrim. It's about all of these other great side characters, all of the exes. They get way more development because the original story is very centered around Scott, and that's for good reason. It was basically written based off of Brian Lee O'Malley's life and experiences. And Scott Pilgrim's journey as a person is in some way a reflection of his own development as a person. So in the original, everything is Scott is an unreliable narrator, and the things that you see and the information that you're given are all kind of warped through his worldview and what he's paying attention to. There's whole big moments in characters' lives that he is technically around for, but you never see them until, like, you just hear about he learns about them way afterwards, which is when you as the audience learns about it. And like when Steven just tells him, like, oh yeah, I realized I was gay around volume 3, and he's like, what, you didn't tell me? He's like, I mean, everyone knows it. You just weren't paying attention. Like you were just, dealing with some other stuff. So I just never really brought it up to you. But everyone knows. And so it's like, what? And just other points where you realize that Scott's version of events are maybe not the most accurate, because of his sort of self-centered worldview, and his naivete, right? So removing him from the equation kind of lets the other characters really shine. It's focused on all the other characters, and they're all delightful. Ramona is great. It's nice to see her having a more, because in the original comic, like, she's around, but she's not much of an active participant, which is sort of like, it's part of the point of her character, is she kind of just creates problems for other people. In this, she's solving problems. Scott's disappearance leads her to be more of an active force in her own life. And that ends up with her resolving a bunch of issues she had with other people and just going through a character arc, which I thought was cool. Wallace gets a ton of play in this, which is epic because he's my favorite character. Wallace is so good. He's the best, dude. He is absolutely the best. He gets so many good moments. There's an entire episode where a major conflict is just caused by the fact that Wallace and Todd keep fucking. They just won't stop having crazy gay sex. So you still get Todd cheating on Envy, but it's with Wallace, which is really funny. Oh, there's so many good lines. There's so much funny shit. I love Neil, whose actor does a great job with a character who didn't really have that much to do in the original. He's just kind of there. He exists to be not Scott. And for Knives to date, essentially. He exists for Knives to date after Scott breaks up with her. But his voice actor, I love the spin he took on Neil's character, where he's always kind of like this, and he's just sort of like, oh, he's just he's out to lunch on everything. The moment where he's, oh, this is my favorite part of a whodunit, and Kim says it's called a whodunit, and he goes, no, I'm whodunit. No, who did it is the correct grammar. I should know. I used to be a writer. Oh, there's that line where Gideon is standing in the rain in front of Julie's house, and he's talking about how hard he's fallen, and he says, I couldn't even get a reservation at McDonald's. When I called them, they just laughed at me. Oh, the show is just full of these great jokes and moments, and it's just the Scott Pilgrim characters in funny situations doing funny shit. I thought it had a great kind of heart, and I don't know, so many cool segments when there's the fight scene between Ramona and Roxy where they're in a video store, and the shelf falls over onto them and they end up in a movie, and they keep, as they're fighting, they knock each other into different films. So fun. Such a great scene. There's an element in this movie that is sort of new and sort of reflective of Brian Lee O'Malley, which is something that I wasn't aware of, but eventually they reveal that Scott was kidnapped by his future self, who is trying to prevent himself from getting with Ramona, because they end up getting divorced in the future. And I like that they don't tell you, okay, because this is not the comic, I'm okay with it, and it's a different version of the story. So I can kind of leave the comic to be its own thing. It's its own timeline and version of events. But so I like that they don't tell you, even if they tell you that they get divorced in the future, I like that they don't tell you why. And both of them kind of assume that it was the other's fault, but maybe it was more Scott's. And apparently Brian Lee O'Malley himself went through a divorce, which so this is kind of like a weird reflection on his own divorce and maybe the ways that he was in the wrong for certain stuff. Clearly very personal, and still like the character of Scott kind of going through him. But it's like, yeah, it's what if future Scott is almost like Nega Scott, or like Scott if he never changed, is sort of like how you could think of it. It's like Scott if he didn't actually get over himself or something, or if he went back to how if he regressed as a person. And I thought that stuff was interesting. I don't know. It was just such a really well animated. I saw some people complaining about the kind of forced out of focus shots, which I didn't find too aggravating, but it was like, okay, this is like a weird visual component. Just really, I don't know, man. I just had a great time. It was, there was so much funny, interesting, weird stuff in it. I think that it's a love letter to the characters of Scott Pilgrim without it feeling like overindulgent. I think you can run the risk of getting kind of like, when you do something like that, you can kind of run the risk of being, how would I describe it? A little too much, just sort of pushing it. There's a specific example I can think of in part 7 of JoJo's that I don't want to get into because it's like near the end and it's a real spoiler thing and it deserves its own discussion, I think. Unless I've already talked about it. I don't think I have. And that's an example where I'm like, this is way too fan servicey for me, and it feels like it's detracting from the actual plot. This does not get into that, in my opinion. This is like, yeah, it's doing, because, oh man, it's so good. I really liked it. We had a really good time. We were confused. We were surprised. We were constantly asking, like, wondering what was going to happen and theorizing about what was going on. And there's so many fun twists. It was great. But I would not recommend this to someone who is not familiar with the original. And like, this is the greatest prank of all time. The way that this was marketed compared to what it actually is, I find really funny. But there are a lot of people I know who have never engaged with Scott Pilgrim, who have heard about it and like, oh, I might like, there's that anime coming out soon. That's going to be like a comic, like a 1-to-1 adaptation of the comic. I'll just wait for that. And they're going to fucking get, that's probably not going to be a great experience. But for what it is, and from my perspective as someone who's consumed the other two versions of the story, I had a wonderful time with it and I got a lot out of it. I appreciated it a lot. There's a lot of sweet moments. A lot of, like, we were laughing our fucking asses off at so much of this show. Yeah, I would recommend. That's who I would if you've already watched it, it is absolutely worth checking out. There's also people who on the other side of the coin have already, they're already over the comic, or they've already read it and they weren't interested maybe in just another version of the same story. Because that's the thing, is going into this, I was thinking, okay, you had the original comic and then you've got the movie. And the movie is, as I would describe it in simple terms, the same plot, basically the same plot, but a different story because of the things that they had to cut out, or the things that they shifted around, or things that literally weren't written into the comic when they were writing the movie. And so I was curious, all right, which side is this going to end up on? Is this going to be the safe thing would be to just adapt the comic, right? Which, to be honest, I would still appreciate. If they made another follow-up to this and it was an actual version of the comic, I'd love it. I love the comic. It would be really cool to get that in animation. It would be cool to capture that in a animated form. That would be great. But for what we got, it's a different story with a different plot. It is something unlike any other adaptation. It's not an adaptation, and I had a great time with it. And it's something that, we finished the show, and I was saying, I wouldn't want to see a sequel to the comic, but this, I wouldn't mind another season of, because it feels like it's written in a specific way where, because it's a different timeline, it's a different version of events, the characters at the end, like, okay, here's a problem with writing a sequel to Scott Pilgrim, the original, is that, like, all the evil exes are dead. Except for Roxy, and I think the twins? Does Gideon die? I forget if he actually dies. But, like, a lot of those characters are just, like, dead in the Scott Pilgrim sense, where they just kind of disappear into coins, because everything's sort of not real. But at the end of this, it's like all these characters are still around, They're still around. They're starting new chapters in their lives or get some kind of closure on something. Lucas loses his acting career. And starts working at the coffee shop. Todd gets back into veganism. Just like all these characters, they're still doing stuff. There's a group, like, we popped off when Wallace is visiting France and he meets Mobile. Oh, it's Mobile! And there is a sequel tease. There's a sequel tease at the end. If there's another season, I wouldn't mind it. I would love if it's the same team coming back. And it would be hard to get all these people back in the booth again, because the cast is so star-studded. But if they were to do it, and they were to get, Brian Lee O'Malley, if it was this whole same cast and crew, I'd love to see what another just version of Scott Pilgrim, a sequel would be like. I think that could be interesting. It's basically its own thing, and for that reason, I appreciate it. And it was honestly, I think it's the brave decision to make, right? The 1-to-1 adaptation would have been the safe option, but this is something that I can respect, I would, not that I wouldn't respect the other thing, but, I think it was pretty ballsy of them to go all out like that on this concept, and they commit to it really hard. Yeah, I would give it a thumbs up. It gets a thumbs up from the Tigster. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. Like, dude, we got to the 4th episode, and I was like, is it called Scott Pilgrim Takes Off because he's just gone? I legitimately think that that's the joke. That's why it's called that. So after Scott Pilgrim, I was gonna go home, but it was storming up and down our area, and I was not. It's really dark. It gets dark like real. It's like not even 6 as I'm recording this, and it's pitch black outside because it's winter. And I was like, I don't want to take the bus home like this. So I stayed over at Kat's, and we ended up watching. We caught the Santa Claus movies on like ABC, or sorry, it's called Freeform now. I haven't seen the Santa Claus movies with the Tim Allen ones in a while. But we saw all 3. Well, the back half of the first one, and then 2 and 3. Because I insisted on watching 3 because we'd already come this far, and it wasn't even late. And you know what? Those movies are okay. So the first 3 movies are like pretty dumb, but they're sweet. They're cute, and they have like some. They make me feel nice, Why can't I just feel nice sometimes when I'm watching a movie? I also remember as a kid having like an interest. One of the things that struck me about the original film, at least, is that the main character is like a divorced father. So it's like, oh, that's like my family, and the head elf in charge is named Bernard, which is my dad's name, which was like, it's not just not a common name to see on someone. He doesn't make it to the third film because I'm pretty sure by that time he was too old, which is like, okay, that's fair. They kind of slowly replace him with, what is his name? Henry, I think, who is this kid. He looks like a little Republican. He's got the little bow tie and his little nerd bowl cut and his little glasses, and he looks like a tiny Republican going to church, which is very cute. It's very funny. So one thing I appreciate about those movies is that they take place years apart from each other and were filmed years apart. So the original one was, what hang on. The Santa Claus. 1994. The second one was 2002. So like actually taking place years later, and then the third one is 2006. So there's like a decent span of time between each one, and the characters actually age up and grow between them, most notably with his son, who's like a little kid in the first movie, and then he's in middle school, and then he's like older, like probably like late high school by the third film. And you actually kind of get to see the family growing up, which is sort of neat. Like they get back every single actor for all of those movies, and I find that kind of charming. Even if the third one, the third one's really stupid. And so part of the Cat hates that one because it has Martin Short in it. I think it would be really funny where he's Jack Frost, the villain. I think it would be really fun. I came up with this idea, and I want some examples on my desk by Monday, ASAP, of a Patrick Bateman style fandom around Martin Short's Jack Frost from the Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause. You could like call him the like Frost, like the Sigma Clause. That's what he is. He's the Sigma Clause. And like you can poo on the Calvin cells. Sigma Clauses stay winning. Frost pilled. Jack Frost pilled. This is a really stupid fucking idea that I had, but it makes me laugh. That film... Okay, here's the weird thing about the Santa Claus 3. It's a really stressful movie, because the whole movie is about the Mrs. Claus is pregnant, and she's going to deliver soon, and she's bummed out that her family won't get to see her, because the secret of Santa has to be preserved, and she has like limited exposure to her family. So Santa has the idea to fly her family out to the North Pole and pretend that it's Canada. Excuse me. They'll pretend that it's Canada and trick her family, her parents, into thinking that they're just at like a toy workshop there that is run by children, I guess, who they routinely refer to as the Canadians, as if there's some kind of like specific class or job. They're like, oh, the Canadians will get your they'll take care of your jacket or whatever. Meanwhile, Jack Frost, the Sigma Claus, is trying to sabotage Santa's life so that he can become Santa. Because there's like they introduced this like Deus Ex Machina super powered wish granting snow globe that if you just wish that you weren't Santa, you can just reverse time and change reality. And he's trying to make him hate being Santa Claus so much to trick him into saying like the word while he's holding the snow globe. and the whole film, a lot of the film is just him sabotaging things and just shit going wrong, and the parents getting more and more mad at him and more disapproving, and it's just, there's like a weird consistent family tension throughout the film, and it's just kind of, it's a weirdly uncomfortable movie to watch. I will say it does lack sort of the kind of Christmas sort of like feel good little heart element that the first two movies have, which I think puts a bit of a damper on things. But I still enjoyed it for being kind of just silly and dumb, and having the Martin Short Sigma clause. And then finally, the next morning before I left, Kat made me watch the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie with Keira Knightley. It's not Keira Knightley, it's Keira Knightley. I almost said Keira Knightley. Don't worry, next week I'm going to make her watch, like, I don't know, something that I want to watch. The cat, her despotism will not last much longer. We just had to watch Pride and Prejudice. So it's a movie that she really likes, and I have never read the book. I didn't have to read it in high school. I've never read it on my own. I didn't even realize it took place in England. I legitimately thought that it... so stupid. I was like, oh, this is in England? I thought it took place in the American South, because I just saw people in like period clothing, and it has prejudice in the title. Because I'm a dumbass. So no. What did I think of Pride and Prejudice? I thought it was really boring. It is not a movie for me. The thing is that it's not a bad movie. I just didn't like it, and I would really not like to ever watch it again. I don't know if I could make it through a second viewing. In a lot of ways, it's very quality, you know? The performances are good. The period elements are, as far as I can tell, not being a historical expert, pretty well put together. There's some really beautiful landscape shots and some nice cinematography that I appreciated. It's just in service to a story that I just cannot bring myself to care about. I just cannot find the will to care about 19th century British romantic politics. The whole, like, oh my god, it's like 2 hours. It's like 2 hours, and every, like, maybe 7 minutes... 7 minutes. There's something kind of interesting happens. Something mildly interesting happens, and that was the only reason that I didn't feel like miserable watching it the whole time. But eventually, around like the hour and a half mark, I just really just started getting fed up with it, to the point like everything starts to go kind of well. And then Keira Knightley walks into a room where the other characters are, and she's crying, and she's holding a letter, and I just kind of snapped, and I was like, God, it's always some bullshit with these people. Jesus Christ. This whole fucking movie is two broads chatting to each other, and one of them, and their conversation is, a letter from Mr. Chumblesnuff. And that's the whole movie. The whole movie, it reminds me of, like, I remember Tite Kubo saying that when he was writing Bleach, whenever he ran out of ideas for what was going to happen next, or how the story would move forward, he just introduced like 10 characters. This version, Jane Austen's version of that, is someone gets a letter. Oh shit, what happens now? Someone gets a letter, and something dramatic has happened right as we're running out of steam on this plot line. And then the next thing happens, and I'm like, oh my god, can you people just fucking get it together? I wanted everyone to get shot in that film. The dad's cool. I like the dad character. He was a real G. I'm always kind of amused by characters or relationships, instances where the daughter has a better relationship with the dad and the dad's cool, and she's like kind of doesn't like her mom. I always find that shit kind of funny. Yeah, I just it's not a movie for me. You know, you can hit the nail on the head for what you're trying to do, but at the end of the day, if I'm not interested in the subject matter, like, I don't know what else to tell you, man. Because everyone, and I get the movie, I understand it, right? It's the tumultuous, it's the desire to be, you know, follow your heart and stuff, but you're in this highly restrictive, ritualized political culture where you get married for political reasons and relations between families. But there's also, you know, there's a conflict between, you know, being the desire to be happy, because some of the characters do take that into account. It isn't entirely just like this 100% just not entirely like misogynistic concept. There are still like characters who care about, oh, I want, you know, I don't want to be with her if I can't make her happy, or vice versa. I don't want to be with her if she can't make me happy. The father clearly cares, like, his first and foremost thing is being, you know, making sure that his daughters are with someone who's like good. And he doesn't care if they're like disgraced or something like that. It's not as important to him, which is why he's a G. Whereas the mother is way more preoccupied with the image of the family and preserving their dignity and all that. And it's just like all this, it's like real shit versus all this bullshit. And then love perseveres in the end. And yeah, I get it. I understand the conflicts. I basically understood what was going on. Although, I'm going to be honest, there were some scenes where they're like whispering, and I'm like, dude, I cannot understand what the fuck they're saying. Because they're whispering and they have these British accents, and you need to put this in some American, please. It has the lady who was in Doom. She was, hold up. Pride and Prejudice 2005. What is her name? Rosamund Pike. Rosamund Pike. She plays the sister scientist in the live-action Doom movie, which came out the same year. And we just thought it was really I was just thinking about the concept. We were talking about, like, what if... Because in that movie, if you recall, she's putting on a really bad American accent. And I think it would be really funny if you put her, Rosamund Pike from the Doom movie, up against Bram Stoker's Dracula. What is his name? Oh my god, why am I blanking on his name? Bram Stoker's Dracula, Keanu Reeves. Jesus, thanks for killing the momentum of the bit, Tygan. Doom, Rosamund Pike versus Bram Stoker's Dracula, Keanu Reeves. So it's a British person who's putting on a really bad American accent, and her real accent is slipping through constantly, versus an American person trying to do a British accent that is constantly failing. I think, like, if you put them in a room with each other, that would be... You could probably, like, create free energy with that shit. Do I have any other thoughts on the Pride and Prejudice film? No. Thanks for showing that to me, babe, so I at least have some perspective. It's just funny because I usually don't watch. The thing is, I usually don't watch or engage with things that I don't think I'll like, which is why I've just sort of avoided that, because I'm like, I probably wouldn't like it. I didn't like it. Guess what? It was nice, you know. I do appreciate the fact for the experience that I was able to you know, watch something that I just didn't like. Not because I thought it was like severely flawed. It just didn't gel with me. Because usually those things end up being I just kind of like, meh, whatever. Like, remember when I said the Sonic movie I didn't care for it. You know, it's like this is like on the low end of the Tigan spectrum. Sonic movie is on like the mid end, and then I don't know, a bunch of other shit that I usually talk about is on the high end. Believe it or not, I do not actively seek out things that I don't think I'll like because I like being happy. Do I have anything to talk about? This could just be a short episode. No, not really. I don't have anything else to say. Yeah, I'm working on the new video. I think it's going to be cool. It's going to be long. We're back to a long video, everybody. So, probably over an hour. And, yeah, I'll be back sometime soon, maybe. Who knows? Probably next week. Same Cellar time, same Cellar channel. Cellarcast channel. Have a good one, everybody. Do I have anything else to say? Oh, wait. Oh, yeah. I usually talk. If you have a question, leave it in the comments below. Phrase in the form of a question because I'm not going to read your thoughts out loud. That's right. I'm going to be real. For the last like 20 minutes, I've had to take a shit, and I've been like mildly distracted by that feeling. So I'm going to go do that. Later.